And one thing that I want to make a note here, and this is the interesting thing. If you see a fraudulent document, let's say Switzerland, right? If somebody tries to create a fraudulent Swiss passport, the the border where the most number of fraudulent Swiss passports are caught is not in Europe, but it is in Japan. Why is that? You tell me. Sorry? Advanced? No, it's not to do with detection. It is to do with intent. If I am going into Switzerland with a Swiss passport, my chances of getting caught are higher because the Swiss know what their passport looks like. So if I have a fraudulent Swiss passport, I try to enter a country which is far away and I hope that they don't know what a Swiss passport looks like, right? So typically, if you look at the number of fraudulent documents that are detected and caught, they are almost always at foreign borders and quite far away from the country that they claim to be from. The problem is, if I get a document that is fraudulently issued to me and it is an authentic document, I will enter Switzerland using a Swiss passport if I manage to obtain it fraudulently. So currently, at your border, all you need to be concerned about is passports coming from foreign countries to make sure that they are authentic. But if your issuance system itself is weak and you are issuing documents to someone who is not entitled to that document, then that person can enter your own country. Now, this becomes a major challenge for people like in Europe because terrorists can get documents that supposedly claim to be issued by France and then issue France, then enter France to do some terrorist activity, right? So this passport issuance process is now become a bigger problem than the travel document fraud itself. And you ask me what is the trigger to do the check? The trigger is the fact that now there is a lot of money and effort going towards getting proper good document through fraudulent means rather than trying to change the document into a fraudulent document, right? So that is where this emphasis on evidence of identity is coming up, right? So weakness in national passport issuance processes undermine the trust in e-passports. So if supposing somebody turns up with an e-passport and I'm able to verify it, I assume that it belongs to that person. And then if I start detecting that some country, I get these e-passports and then I figure out later that it was not properly issued to them, I don't trust any e-passport that comes from that country. Right? So it affects your own citizens going somewhere else. If cases are detected of people being able to obtain documents that they are not entitled to. So it is this question of entitlement. The question of entitlement comes back to establishing the identity of the person who's applying, right? So that person is the right person and he indeed has the right to your travel document. Now, there is this issue. So for example, in a lot of Latin American countries, you can buy a passport, right? You invest in that country, they give you a passport, right? It's the same with Caribbean. I mean, I went to I went to Antigua, and the very first banner I saw on the airport, come as a visitor, leave as a citizen. It is that easy, right? Come as a visitor, leave as a citizen. How much are people going to trust that passport when their own citizens go and present it somewhere else, right? So the trigger for making sure that only the right people get the passport is not just about a threat, it's about the threat of reputation when your own citizens travel somewhere, right? So that's the issue. So in a traditional approach, we had birth registration where identity comes into existence, right? So somebody is born, we register it somehow. Some countries are very efficient in registering every birth. Some countries do registration after a few months, but generally birth registration works. Then an identity document is issued, and typically this is after that person has turned 15. Because before that, biometrics are not very stable. Their face changes, their fingerprint change. So usually a firm identity document is issued around the age of 15. And at that point of time, the identity is biometrically linked to the person, right? Because you have a photograph, maybe you have his fingerprints, iris, whatever. But that linking of the person to the identity happens at that point of time. After that, identity is used in different contexts. For example, is used to cross a border. And then there is death registration, identity ceases to exist. But that is assuming that every death is reported, right? That is a big problem in most civil registry systems, is death is not reported. When somebody is born, people are quite happy to go and register that child. If somebody dies, they don't think about the fact that they need to go and register that death, right? Which then leads to the problem that I talked about in New Zealand, is that the passports were issued to people who had died. So the fact that you can get a death registry done properly is possible, but it's not very probable. But that is how a traditional approach, which we call a linear model, this is how it works. Can you change the slide, please? Hamza? So the problem with this approach is that once an identity comes into existence and is enrolled, it is never checked again, right? And a one-time issuance is the full stop there, right? A wrong issuance is never corrected. And it's only as strong as its weakest link, which means that if it came into existence and is enrolled, we don't know whether we never go back and check whether it was properly issued. There is no post-mortem that is done on this, right? So what does EOI do? The EOI approach is covered in a guidance document that was created by the Implementation and Capacity Building Working Group of ICAO. The work was initiated by New Zealand after they found those 9 passports. A lot of this approach comes from what they do and what some other countries do. So there were quite a group of people who got together to create this guidance document. And it focuses on establishing that the identity is genuine and the individual is the true owner of the identity, right? But it also talks about maintaining that identity, right? It's not just about issuance, but once issued, you keep maintaining that identity, right? Yeah, next one. So that is why it defines 3 principles. Principle 1 is to say that identity is genuine. So we have to establish that the identity is genuine. The second one is that, even I can't read that. The presenter links to the identity. And the third one is the presenter uses the claimed identity. And this third part is the one that is different from a traditional civil registry approach, right? It is checking that the person actually uses the claimed identity. So under identity is genuine, what do? We need to determine if the identity exists at all. Is there some precedence for this identity to exist, right? And the second one is to determine that the identity is a living identity. That means that person is still around. The person to whom that identity attributes belong is still around. Next. To establish that the identity is genuine and has not been invented, we need some evidence. And usually it is a foundational document, for example, a birth certificate. So EOI does away with this concept that the birth certificate is the only document. It says birth certificate is a document which is used for establishing foundational identity, right? That was the question you asked about the birth certificate thing. We call it foundational documents now, right? We don't call it breeder documents. There was a term called breeder documents in between, but now we call it foundational documents, right? But then we also talk about additional evidence, secondary sources, for example, school, religious institutions, employment, etc., right? So these are additional information. Where do you obtain it from? From civil or national registry if you have one, and more typically, it will be the applicant who provides you that information. That's where it's going to come from, right? But once it comes from there, you have to prove that it is genuine by doing some cross references. Next slide, please. So, what do we call a foundational document? A foundational document is anything that establishes some core attributes of the person, right? Each person, I said, had biographic attributes. Any document that establishes the core attributes of the person is what we call a foundational document. So it can be it is a document that establishes his name, date of birth, sex, place of birth, for example. So the document clearly, this guidance document lists a few possible sources. Certificate of a membership to a community, for example, in Canada, they have this Indian status card for their indigenous people, right? Canada has this what is known as the First Nations people, the original inhabitants, and within that, they need to get a card to get some certain benefits, right? So the parents always go and register their children for that card because it gives them that benefit, right? So that now becomes a foundational document because the establishment of the identity was done at the time of birth and for the issuance of that special privilege that they get. It could be a driver's license. A lot of time people get a driver's license before they get a passport. It could be even a previous passport, could be a health insurance identification document, a senior citizen's card, any other travel document, anything. But you notice that we do not say birth certificate here very specifically, right? Because not every country has a birth certificate, did not have a birth certificate, or not in use at all. So there are many other ways where you can make sure that the same name, same date of birth, same sex, same place of birth is reflected in a number of documents, and any of these documents will always have that information. Hamza? There are others. So if you look at this guidance document, it is freely downloadable from the ICAO website. It could be a certificate of naturalization because their person is not born in your country, but they kind of lived there, and by naturalization they become citizens. You could have a military ID card, a school ID or a school record, a medical card, adoption order, or immigration documents with or ones with foreign passport. So there are multiple places from which you can get this information. So all of that can be part of the, and a lot of it is what you get from the applicant, right? So you can ask for this kind of information. That kind of establishes that the same set of attributes is present in multiple documents, right? Not just a birth certificate, but is there in multiple documents, right? So a person may forge a birth certificate, but they'll have to forge a hell of a lot of more documents if you ask for more documents. So always the first time you establish an identity, especially for issuing a travel document, the more documentation you ask for, the more chances are that you will figure out that something is wrong here, right? Next, Hamza. So here we are just giving a list of foundational documents and what kind of information you need from that. Could be what we need is name at birth, date of birth, place of birth, birth registration or national identification number, biometrics, and the identity related information is present in all of these different places. So for example, even an email address would tell you that that person's name is what he claims to be, right? So lots of places through which you can find out this foundational information. It can be school or church records. It can be utility records. People have a utility bill, right, for electricity, for other stuff. So all of this is additional sources of information. So the more sources of information that you use to establish the identity or the attributes of that identity, the better, right? So that we come up with this first thing that the identity is genuine. Hamza? Then we have to establish that is it a living identity? Failure to record deaths is very common. This can lead to someone else trying to claim that identity. So it is important to establish that the identity is still living. What evidence can be presented for this? Death certificate, if it is registered, or if that country registers death quickly or properly. But to prove that someone is actually using that identity, it's a living identity, you can ask them for some bills that they have paid in that name, right? If I'm paying a bill for electricity in my name, that identity probably still is alive, right? It's not just looking at the death register. It's about looking at additional information about what is being used. You could obtain this information from National Registry if you have it, of course from the applicant, but you can also go to financial institutes, for example. Almost everyone has a bank account, and whether that bank account has any transactions in it, right? That's one possibility. And how to prove? There's always an in-person component, right? You ask that guy to walk in through the door. If he's alive, he will come there. That's the assumption, right? So in-person component is almost always there when you're trying to establish, is it a living identity? Hamza? The second thing that we need to do is make sure that the presenter links to the identity. So two broad objectives. The person who is registering there's some linkage between his biometric and biographic. But the second one is more important, that identity is unique and the person is the sole claimant of that identity. So that photograph cannot have two different names, right? If this name, this photograph, the other name, a different photograph, right? So that uniqueness is an important aspect of it. Yeah, just go through the whole thing. Okay, so in-person presentation for applicant is normally required for this. But you can also depend on trusted referees, right? So somebody who is respected, known, and you can ask them whether this person is who he claims to be. But there are challenges there. So for example, American Samoa, right? You know, Samoa, there's Samoa and there's American Samoa, right? Now, what they did at that point of time in registering people for American citizenship is to go to a village elder to ask, does he live in American Samoa? Now, the thing is, people in that same family live on both sides of the border. So the village elder would say, yeah, he lives in the American part of Samoa, right? While that guy is actually a Samoan citizen, so now they ended up with two passports, one a Samoan passport and an American Samoan passport. So they trusted the elders as trusted referees. But that led to fraud. Who are you trusting to get that information also matters, right? So when you say trusted referees, it's not just village elders and that kind of stuff, but you have to be careful of that. There is a border here in Africa where apparently that family name is available in 5 different countries. And there was a case of a guy who had 5 passports, right? Because in each of the country, he could prove that his family was there and hence he lived there. The family name was Jipo, right? And apparently it can be any one of 5 countries. And he managed to get a passport from each 5 of them because he could prove with some trusted referee that he actually indeed was born in that country. You can't be born in 5 countries at the same time, right? But he managed to do that. So this is a question of how do you cross-reference and what sources of information do you use as trusted sources, right? And you might have to relook and revisit them all the time. Like in the case of American Samoa, they were depending on the elders. But they found out that there was a problem there because they are all family. The elders always vouched for them. Was that trusted information? No. Correct? So it's a balance that you have to make sure that you are getting it right. And of course, biometric matching, right? If biometrics is part of civil registry or some such database exists. Unfortunately, it does not always exist, right? But there is a point in identity establishment that is very crucial. Just like I mentioned the date of birth at the beginning, just before lunch, supposing someone comes and claims his name is Rajesh Kumar and this is what he looks like, you register it there, in the future, that same person should not be able to come and claim a different identity by presenting the same face. So you are now locking him to that identity, right? And sometimes that's the best thing you can do because there is no way of going back and checking whether it actually is him. Next. So this leads us to the uniqueness of the identity. You have to ensure that the same claimant does not have multiple identities in the system. So how do you do that? You can verify core identity information, name, date of birth, place of birth, parent details, etc. The more things that two identities have in common, the higher the suspicion that it is the same person claiming multiple identities. You also can check biographic information with all previous applicants. So coming back to passport issuance, because that is the main topic that we are here for, every time a passport photo is submitted, you should run a biometric match against all the applicants who have applied for your passport. You understand? I'm not just comparing him to his previous application. I'm comparing it to all applications I have in my system. So I do a one-to-many match. Does this photograph appear against some other identity, right? And that is necessary. I know a lot of you have traveled to the US and you know that every time you go there, you have to present your fingerprints, right? Every time you cross the border, you have to present your fingerprints. They have a data center in New Jersey where every fingerprint capture that has happened every time you go to the US is stored, and it is compared against every one of them. But once you enter the country, they also check it against other identities that have been claimed. Right? So this is not about just making sure that you match your previous identity, it's also to make sure you do not match anybody else's identity. Right? And that is very important because you want to make sure that the uniqueness of the identity is there. Next. Like I said, biometric patching. Yeah. Then the third principle we have is presenter uses the claimed identity. So basically, we have to demonstrate the consistent use of the claimed identity. Hamza? So this is where I talked about the social footprint before we went for lunch, correct? About whether the identity is being utilized. What evidence do we have? Education and qualifications. So a person definitely went to school or college, or some had some kind of this thing. Electoral rolls, employment history, driver's license, tax numbers, healthcare, registered at a hospital for taking some treatment, banks, etc. If you look at a country like Brazil, for example, Brazil doesn't have a national ID card. And each one of their states can issue an identity document. And then what happened is people have identity documents from 23 different states, and each one of them claims to be somebody else, right? But the interesting thing in Brazil is the driver's license database is unique across the whole country. They don't have a unique identity card system across the entire country, but they have a driver's license database that is unique across the entire country. Similarly, they have to register with the Ministry of Finance whether they pay taxes or not. Without that tax registration number, they cannot do a number of transactions that they would normally carry out in their day-to-day lives. So the two sources of information in Brazil that helps establish unique identity is driver's licenses and the tax registration number, right? The reason that we bring up these kind of examples is to emphasize that it is not the establishment of an identity card that helps you establish this kind of uniqueness. It is any system in your country that enrolls people on a national basis and does some kind of a cross-check to make sure that their identity is unique, right? So where to obtain this information? Civil National Registry from the applicant, financial institutions, utilities, public authorities. And of course, there is an in-person component and interview to probe the info provided in case you are not able to trust that information. So that could be an in-person interview to clarify some of that issue. Next. So in summary, what we said is that we have this identity is genuine, which is principle one, that the identity exists and is a living identity. The second one is the presenter links to this identity, which is to make sure it is unique and the presenter is the sole claimant. And the third, which is what differentiates it from a typical civil registry, is to prove that the identity is consistently used in a social footprint, right? That is where the EOI principle is different from the civil registry. Hamza? So we are going to apply this to the passport application process, right? And the case study for the mastery test will be based on some cases that will be for passport application, okay? So what do we need to do when we issue a passport? We need to ensure that the identity exists. We need to ensure that the identity is living. We need to ensure that the person who's making the application actually links to this identity. And then that the identity is unique. And very importantly, the identity is used, right? So if I were to go back and come back to the example I told you about New Zealand, when they issued those nine passports to those fraudulent applicants, which ones of this did they not check? I told you about the case of the 9 people, right? Which of these principles must have been missing? Okay.
They didn't check if the identity was living. That the identity is being used.
So the fact that they did not check that the identity is living and the identity is used is what allowed them to carry out this fraud. The people that the names that they were claiming had already passed away at the age of less than 3, and there was no record of them having used that identity in any other context. And that is what was missing in that piece, right? Hamza, next slide, please. So we're going to look at a first-time applicant versus a renewal applicant with respect to these 5 principles, 5 objectives that need to be checked. Next. The first one is identity exists. Civil registry, birth certificate, and also what we call alternate information networks. So alternate information networks are things like utility bills, some society memberships, anything that kind of establishes that these attributes belong to them. The identity is living, typically in-person application and some additional records to prove that it's being used. Person links to this identity, it could be in-person application, referral letters from trusted sources, biometric matching if biometric registry exists. Identity is unique, check against past records, verify core attributes against past application. And this is not their own application, but against other applications, right? And identity is used, which is additional records, interviews, reference letters from trusted referees, utility bills, bank transactions, any of them will tell you that this identity is being used. Next, Hamza. But now let's say the same person comes again for a renewal of the application. You already have information from the previous application, right? That time you did some establishment of their identity and their attributes. Now you want to make sure that this data that is already collected during the previous application is the same data that is being presented back to you in the new application, correct? But you may also choose not to asking for information that you already know, but only if there is there is new information. So for example, if you are asking for educational qualification, the last time he applied for a passport, he was maybe a graduate student, but now he claims to have got a PhD, right? That is some information if you capture, some countries do. That is the portion that you need to validate. Identity is living, so of course you go back and check death records if you have any, or additional records. And person links to identity, here you again match his biometric to his previous application. Then to check that identity is unique, You verify the core attributes against past application, the biometric match to previous application, and biometric match against other applications. Right? So again, the one-to-many search that I said you must do. And to do that, to ensure that the identity is used, you may use additional records. You may choose to have interviews, and you may choose to have reference letters from trusted referees. So a slight change between an initial applicant and a renewal. In a renewal, you have some information already. Correct? That is the thing. Um, Now, the reason that this is very specifically mentioned in this guidance is in a lot of countries, they ask you for the same information irrespective of whether it's a new applicant or a re-applicant. The process they follow is exactly identical, right? The process of verification is also as if this person is a new applicant. And the question that is coming up from a risk-based approach is it necessary? Now, why would we even think about it? Is because a number of resources you have to allocate to be able to do the same process for every person. Correct? I give this example of US visas. The first time you apply for a visa, it's a very exhaustive interview before they issue you a multiple entry visa. Correct? The second time that you apply for a visa, they only confirm what they already knew and then they ask for additional information. Typically, when you apply for a third time visa, you don't even have an interview, they just give you the bloody visa if you've not done anything wrong in the past. Now, what that allows them is to focus all the officers they have on interviewing the first time applicants. So, all of that resources are now put in the place where the most possible threat of fraud exists is those who are first time applicants, right? You need a lot of manpower to do that. If your manpower is doing this for everybody, you are stretched. Your focus is not there, correct? So the idea in this guidance document is differentiate between the classes of people who are applying. First time applicants need a lot of scrutiny. Re-applicants require less scrutiny, and if your processes are created such that you use the same level of scrutiny for all the applicants, you are not going to have the bandwidth to do the job of scrutinizing first-time applicants, right? That is what drives this requirement, this guidance, this recommendation in this guidance document. Okay, next. So in summary, what we are saying is that evidence of identity is a risk-based and evidence-based approach. Fundamentally, what it does is it goes back to talking about a social footprint and re-evaluating the decision that you made previously. And it is a robust and secure process for identity establishment. Yeah, I think that's the last slide, right? Hamza? Yeah. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, at this point, I would really love if we have a question. Yes.
Thank you. But I realize that this works on the assumption that the system is linked to the different sources of secondary information, which is the banks, bills, taxes, driver's license, but yeah, which is not the case in many of our countries.
No, I completely agree. That was an excellent point because one of the things that we are trying to do in this guidance is to emphasize that you need those linkages. That is the whole point, right? You need those linkages. If you have silos of information, it is very easy for a fraudster to gain access because you are not comparing with others. That's where cooperation comes in, right? And this kind of information linkage, so for example, right now, again, I go back to the New Zealand example. They have this, what they call the real ID, which is an ID that is given to you when an identity is established. And you can use it for banking transactions, you can use it for driver license, you use it for passport. It's a single information database that is shared across all of them, all the agencies, right? And that cooperation is necessary. I come back to the example I gave of Brazil. Brazil has the same problem. Everybody has their own silos of information which they do not want to share. But the only agency that was ready to share was the agency that was issuing driver's license, right? Now, in every country, Now, I'm not saying in every country. In most countries, you will, if you look, possibly find one database, for want of a better word, is more integrated across the country, right? That gives you information on something. Use that as the reference basis. So, for the first step that you need to do is identify that source of information which you know is not siloed. In Brazil, for a long time, they were trying to break down the walls between the silos. It did not work. We were doing a project, three of us were doing an audit on that identity establishment process in Brazil, which is when we realized that the driver's license database seems to not have silos. It was a discovery that we as outsiders made, right? But they never thought of it. Now, in every country, people typically focus on trying to say, okay, this data I need from you, and you're not giving it to me, and we make it a confrontation to kind of get the data from somebody. The approach that we are saying here is look if there is some other way of still getting that data, because finally what you want to do is identity establishment, right? So this thing about using the driver's license database, because we were very surprised when we found out that the driver's license database takes a photograph, compares it to driver's license issued across the whole country. And we said, oh, so this database is not siloed, right? So it could be different sources of information. It doesn't have to be a civil registry. That's the point we're trying to make here. Now, before going forward, I would really love for you guys to do this module evaluation, because it's a use case, and I need to check whether all of you are now on the system.
Excuse me, colleagues. Kindly wait to start on the assessment. Let's have the groups ready. Then the trainer will give you the instructions. There are some people who already. Sakira, I hope it is not you. We're Julie. We can see you from here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Is there anybody amongst us who needs accommodation? Say you have homes here in Kampala. Yes. Maureen, you have accommodation in Kampala. Only those ones coming from up country and have no accommodation in Kampala. The beauty is that I know your homes. So please, whoever is coming from up country and needs accommodation, come to me. Minus you fortunate.
Okay, so the mastery test for module 2 is open. So if you log in to your TPEMS, you will see, you go to mastery test number 2. Now you are in a group. You all been assigned to different groups. Among yourselves, only one person will answer the test, not all of you, right? So if you are a group of 6 people, you do the discussion, and whatever consensus you come to, one person will enter the answer. Sir? Yes. So basically, you go to the TPEM, you go to the portal, your mastery test 2, right? Yes, that's open. Just click on that. No, click on the mastery test 2.1. Okay, then you keep going down and you say, I agree to the terms. Yeah. Okay, so this is the evidence of identity. So there is one scenario. You read it, you discuss, one person enters the answer in the group, right? Everybody who's in the group is already being assigned. Okay, only one of you will answer the questions, right? But all of you discuss, agree on the answer, only one person will submit. Yes, you start. No, no, first he has to agree, then you will. So, okay, so there are 3 scenarios. So this scenario is a group basis. So there is a question, and then scroll up, scroll down. So you have to choose these answers that you want, and then you go to the next. So there are 3 scenarios you need to answer. Okay? Okay, you guys managed to get in? Yeah. Oh, scroll down and agree to this terms and conditions first. Agree. Okay, so there are 3 scenarios. So you have a scenario where you read it out, and then there are these answers. So you discuss among yourself, and only one person enters the answers. Okay. Only one person, right, among you. But you discuss and then agree together. Okay. You managed to get there? Okay, click on that one. Scroll down and then agree. One person submit. You discuss and then one person submit. Okay. So there are 3 scenarios. So you go there. This is you read the scenario, right? And then there are questions. Then you decide, and then you go to second scenario, third scenario. So all 3 scenarios answer. Okay. So only one of you actually inputs the answer for the group, right? You are one group. You're all going on lab. Sorry. You go to the TPEM's website. Then you go to tests.
Oh, okay.
You go to mastery test 2.1. No, no, no. Click on that one. Okay, scroll down. Agree to the terms and conditions. So now you have 3 scenarios. So if you scroll up like that, so you read this scenario. This is a case. Then you look at the questions, discuss among yourselves what is the answer, and only one person enters the answer for the 3 scenarios.
From the objective.
No, 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 yeah, no, no. Fundamentally, you read this scenario 1.
Okay, okay.
Then, based on that, there are questions being asked.
Yeah.
Based on this scenario.
Yeah.
So you agree among yourselves which is the right answer, and only one person inputs the answers. Right? Hmm.
On this
Yeah,
one,
yes.
we just pick an
Yes.
objective. Then with the process. The
Yeah,
right
yeah,
answer,
yes.
right?
Correct. Correct. And only one of you does that. All of them. Yes, all the 3 scenarios. Right? Okay. But discuss among yourselves, come to a consensus, and only one person. You guys good? Yeah, only one person enters the answers. All right, you decide who among you, right? Yes. You have a question or anything? No. We good? Oh, good. Only one person should. Okay, you know that only one person should enter the answers,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, perfect, good. only one person should enter the answer.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Only one person should enter the answer. Okay, just one person should enter the answer. Okay, during the discussions, if any of you want some questions or assistance, raise your hand, I will walk over, right? If there is some dispute within the group. Sorry? No, 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 you click it, it's okay. Click this one. We're waiting for her. Ah. No, you can start reading the case. It doesn't matter. She said it's going to be time. No, 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 there's no time. There's nothing time. No, 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 you can open it. It's fine. Just go ahead and open it. No, not now. Click on. And the terms and conditions, accept it, and then I take it. Okay, so there are three scenarios here. One, two, three. That is the case. So you read the scenario, and then you scroll down here. There are questions. You have to take the answer. You agree. You have a discussion. Agree, and one person enters the answer. Okay. So okay.
Hello? Hello, team. Officers, can I have your attention for a minute, please? Good afternoon. We have had a few members who are unable to be tagged to groups. So your first try of submissions, consider it a test run. We are going to redo the test. We are adding some members who are not added to a group, so that means they will not score. Okay. Just relax. Consider it as an opportunity for better. Just a minute, please. Just give us 2 minutes so that we can load the other members. Don't worry, all the questions are what the facilitator has been teaching you.
Hello, hello, officers. Could I have your ears for a minute, please? So, to avoid the previous situation, I'm going to read out the names in the respective groups. If you do not hear your name, you register with George before the test is loaded. So, group 1, we have Rachel Rizira, Joy Jogole, Mohamed Magomu, Paul Maido, Moses Muhairi, and Henrietta Okulu. Group 2, we have Fiona Tuhaire, Timothy Atwine, Fiona Muhumuza, Sasha Rujumba, and Morris Tumsime. Group 3, we have Mark Samanya, Martha Mboneko, Ronald Onyango, Judith Orech, and Martin Sentamu. Group 4, we have Chantong, we have Kahangwe, Kalidasi, Sakira, and Yeya. Group 5, we have Abia Jen Kangume, we have Maureen Mudondo, Joyce Nakazi, Fatuma Namtebi, Mebo Nancha, and Harrison Sali. Group 6, we have Josephine Akelo, Ruth Ayesiga, Gusolo Emmanuel, Wallace Bindeba, and Rosette. Group 7, we have Maureen Atukwase, Ronald Burio, Brian Kaima, Adrian, and Wejuli. Group 8, we have Paul Edutu, Nuwe Elijah, Vincent Mugisa. We have Evas Nahurira and Judith Niwakora. Group 9, we have Paul Berengu, Edward Bukenya Mweke, Emmanuel Echun, Tony Okori, and Samuel Otim. Group 10, we have Allen Businje, Jamil Buembo, Abubakar Jemba, Fortunate Mutazhara, and Rosemary Namirembe. Group 11, we have Sharon Aguga, James Albert Mayanja, Christabel Muzaki, Cuthbert Washaba, and Elvis Ahurira. 12, we have Ajij, we have Jackie Karundu, we have Zura Karunji, George Nsuna, and Kennedy Bomba. 13, Joseph Gubi, Amil, Eden Kato, Bob Mukembo, and Shira Rukundo. 14, Kenneth Biaruhanga, Luku Sota, Zainab Nahamia, Wilfred Okumu, and Innocent Rubankene. 15, we have Mukoza, we have Christine Kabuo, we have Robert Mugumya, we have Julian Tuhaire, and Amina Mutoni. 16, Susan Atai, Diana Atim, Maria Nachwejwe, Melan Namuli, and James Obige. 17, we have Asha Hussein, Bwesije Marcelino, Margaret Kawuo, Gilbert Kabzire, Moses Odeke, and Arthur Kwesiga. Any name, anyone who hasn't had their name? Only one person? Okay. George, please capture the names. There is one in Mark's group, and then one Mr. Gilbert's group. So we are just waiting to update those two participants, because if they miss on this first test, we shall not be able to capture the remainder of the exams. So we have to capture everyone at once. Thank you. Okay. Okay. So, yes. He didn't confirm. Consider it as an opportunity for best
Good afternoon, colleagues. May I have your attention, please? Allow me to pass on this information on behalf of the trainer. It looks like we are having a bit of a challenge admitting the 2 people. So we are going to postpone the assessment until tomorrow morning to give the team in Montreal time to add the 2 participants on board. It would not be fair for us to leave them out and yet they've been. May I have your attention, please? It would not be fair for us to leave them out and yet they've been attending the training. That is one. The second issue is that if you don't attend tomorrow for any reason, that means you're not able to complete the course. And that means he will mark you absent. So you will not be able to complete the entire training. So kindly make sure you're here tomorrow until Friday. Yes, and the team that were not able to come, I think about 8 people, so they cannot also join us. Yes. So tomorrow we shall start at exactly 9. So make sure you're here, ready for the test, and also any other information. Yeah. So let's give the trainer an opportunity to explain.
Thank you. So fundamentally, this mastery test, I will open tomorrow after I included those 2 people into that groups. Because once a test is done and closed, I cannot add people to the group, right? So I have to wait for them. So we will, and there is a problem with the registration that needs to be resolved. So once that is resolved, because Montreal is working on it, I can't do it from here. We will do the test tomorrow morning. We will also do the test for the first module that we skipped in the afternoon. But don't worry, I'll give you a small revision before you do the test, right? And so we finish both of them tomorrow. And if we are done, then we are on track for the rest of the course.
Thank you, Mr. Rajesh. We have tea ready for you. Please, before you leave, let's utilize that chance. Let's not leave our bites behind. Thank you and have a good evening. Yongeza tena.
Hello. Can Vicent Mugesa come here, please? Vicent. Vicent Mugisa. Vicent Mugisa.